we are going to explore the idea of healing through myth, dreams, personal narratives. Hi, I'm Michael Westgate. Thank you for joining me. I've helped people with chronic pain for over 2 decades. I aim to help you say goodbye to pain and hello to a fully lived life. Healing through myth, dreams, personal narratives. This is a subject that's been very interesting to me for many years, and partly because it doesn't fit very well with certain people. So certain scientists don't think this is a valid way of looking at things because you can't examine it through logic fully. It doesn't lend itself to being attended to in that way. I'll show you. I think it's a very valid tool. It's an avenue into understanding and interacting with the subconscious and the elements within us that tend to generate chronic pain and other problems that are due to certain shocks that we've experienced in the past. So I think it's a very valuable healing tool. And of course, I'm not the only one that thinks that, obviously, because the people that I've studied that do believe in this include practitioners like Dr. Peter Levine, who I've been doing a lot of videos based on his work for probably the last 3 or 4 months, because I think so highly of him. And he does talk about how healing is a hero's journey, that he also believes that trauma, oddly, is often a doorway to profound personal transformation and insight, which I think is right. And it's really nice to hear someone say that, because when you're stuck in it, it doesn't feel that way at all. It feels like just torture. So that's what we're going to explore today. And I'm, hope to give you a context that helps you utilize this knowledge in your journey, your personal journey, and to make it richer, hopefully, speed up things for you. Also give you some context to understand how it works, how can the mechanisms of existence, of consciousness, how they're structured. Because I do believe that when you understand that, it's easier to relate to what's happening to you and easier to create positive change. What we're going to do now is we're going to do another sort of meditative journey. And I'm borrowing this from Dr. Levine's book called Healing Trauma, which I highly recommend. It's not very long. It also comes in audiobook form, which I find very useful. And it's quite helpful tool. It has a lot of tools in it, a lot of practices that you can utilize. So this is story time. We're going to start with a story. And what I want you to do while I tell the story is try to pay attention to how your body responds to the story. And I'm going to do my best to cue those sorts of body sensations by the way I tell it. We'll see how I do, but that's the goal. And then we're going to talk about what that shows us in terms of how it relates to myth, dreams, and personal narrative, and see how that can be helpful. So I just want to imagine this is you. So the story is really about you. So just imagine it's your birthday, and it's getting kind of closer to the afternoon, and you have the day off, and you're feeling a little down because it's your birthday and no one, you didn't make any plans, but neither did anyone else. So you're kind of feeling a bit lonely and down. You're like, okay, well, what should I do about that? What should I do for myself? You come up with this idea. Maybe I'll go to the movies. There's a movie that's playing that I really like. That'll be something. So you're like, all right, so let's take a look at, look up the times, and here we go. Okay, I've got about an hour to get there. That's about right. And you start getting ready to go, but then you realize, like, where's my wallet? It's not where it usually is. So you start, okay, where could it be? Well, I know a few places I'll check. So you're going to check the usual places that you put it carefully. You're still all right, but you're okay. It's not anywhere I usually leave it. What's going on here? You're starting to get a little anxious. Where could it be? And, time's ticking. And you're like, okay, now this isn't a very good birthday. I'm really wanted to do something fun. And now I don't even know where my wallet is. And that's worrying me. And then your phone rings. You answer it, and it's your friend Susan. And Susan says, "Well, I want to let you know that you left your wallet in my house." You're like, "Oh my God, phew. Oh, yeah, that's a relief. Okay, I don't have to think about replacing all those credit cards and everything else. Oh my God." So, and you say to her, "Oh, it's just so relieved. Thank you for letting me know. I really appreciate that." Ooh, okay. So you get dressed, kind of you go to get in your car, drive over to Susan's house. You're feeling a bit better. You're like, oh, okay, well, at least it's not a disaster on my birthday. And it's getting a little bit dark. So you go up to her front door, and there's no lights on, and the whole house is dark. You're like, what's going on? I just talked to her. Oh, so you knock on the door, no answer. You're like, oh, come on. I mean, now you're not feeling so great, right? You're like, okay, what the hell? I mean, I just called her. She said she'd be here. Where could she be? And then you hear a voice that says, "Oh, it's unlocked. Come on in." And you're like, okay. So you open the door and you walk in. It's a dark hallway. You're like, you can barely see. You don't know where the light switch is. You're like, okay, what's going on here? And you're kind of fumbling your way, down the hallway towards where her voice was, feeling a little, kind of miffed and confused. And then you get into the dining room and the lights turn on. All your friends are there and everyone yells, "Happy birthday." I want to check in with you guys and tell me, what did that story feel like to you? Anyone that wants to share, what was your sense of that story? All right, I want to talk about how stories are generated in our nervous system. And I'm going to talk about how that relates to how we get better and how it relates to things like myths and legends, and even spiritual texts that people study. So this is my current understanding of how this works. And this is why I created this charts like this, so I could teach other people about it. The way a story is generated is by your nervous system deciding which of these ways of being it's going to switch on in response to what it's observing, or in this case, imagining. And here's how that works. The body and your gut brain are constantly alert to what's happening around you every millisecond. It has a processing power that's just staggering. Every second, your subconscious brain processes something like 600,000 bits of data, and your conscious mind can process up to 16. But what happens is, let's just say that at the beginning of this story, the thought of birthday caused or triggered your interpretation in your subconscious turn on shutdown. So what happens when it switches to shutdown is that your whole physiology, literally, like your whole biochemistry, your hormones, your heart rate, blood flow, all of it changes. What that change triggers is feelings in the body sensations. And then from those body sensations arise thoughts. And then from those thoughts and feelings arise an urge to either be or do a certain thing. So if you're in shutdown, what arises is spontaneously is that you want to kind of hide from the world, kind of like sag down and be low energy, not really active. And the thing that's amazing about this is that there's a story embedded in each of these states. If shutdown turns on, the story is something like, you're depressed and numb, right? So it's hopeless. I have no power. No one gives a damn. Why bother? I'm small. I mean, it's a flavor. Of course, it's going to be different for everyone. And the other thing that's interesting is that often there will be images as well. Not everyone has that all the time, but that does happen. So when you're in this state, you feel a certain way in your body. You have certain thoughts that arise from that. And then there's a narrative that kicks in. So when you went through the story with me, depending on how you're wired in relationship to the circumstances that are imagined, you'll have a sequence of these different states turning on for each kind of moment of the story, the shift of circumstances. And from that shift, from one state to another, because you could go from shutdown to, oh, I'm irritated because she said she'd be there. So that's what that is. You're irritated. Hey, she said she'd be here and she's not here. So that's frustration, right? And then there's a story to that. It's forget about me, or you call from somewhere else. I mean, there's this sort of unsettledness. When the surprise came, it depends on the person, right? It could be social engagement or play, or it could be somewhere here where you're not sure that, you're kind of uneasy, but you're mostly safe, but you're kind of overwhelmed. Then what happens from that sequence of states turning on in relationship to what you've experienced, there's a narrative, right? So you have basically in the nervous system, you say, it was my birthday and I was depressed. I decided to do something that might help me feel better. I was kind of better now. I was kind of in between, not upset and better. And then I found that my wallet was missing and I went down to freeze. I felt helpless and confused or frozen, it depends on the person, right? Or it could be angry, right? You could say, where's my damn wallet? And then, your friend calls and maybe you're over here in social engagement, actually. You're like, oh, there's a friend and they have my wallet. That's great. And then when you drive over there and she's not there, you're back to anger again. And then you're going down the hallway where it's kind of scary and maybe you're almost ready to run out the door because it's too weird. And then surprise, and maybe if you freeze at first, you're like, what? And then, once you settle in, you're into play or something like that. And that's what generates the story, is the body sensation interpretations of what you're experiencing. And then your subconscious actually creates a narrative from that. And then it records it in your memory. Now, here's the real clincher though. If a story ends poorly, right? So this one ended fine, right? There's a problem because the subconscious doesn't like stories that end poorly, because it means that there was a circumstance that you couldn't figure out how to navigate properly, meaning that it turned out okay in some way. And that is marked as territory unsolved or monster unconquered is basically what it ends up being. What's the solution? Well, we're going to talk about that right now. And I'm going to go through a little more detail about how this is structured in our nervous systems. But that's the basic gist of how stories are generated. If you want to study Carl Jung, then you'll find out that these archetypes, which are sort of interpretive relation parts of ourselves that the subconscious interprets and forms into certain images and dynamics. What they represent is aspects of our psychology in relationship to our journey through life, right? So, and these repeat throughout cultures, throughout legends. It's very consistent. And of course, the thing that I want to talk about today and I want us to work on is we want to know what myth you're living. Because one of the things that Carl Jung talked about is all of us are living a myth, meaning we're playing out a story. And what you want to know is, am I living a hero's journey or am I living a tragedy? Now, there's more categories than that, but these are the two basic ones. And all of us at some point of our lives, especially if you have traumatic issues, you have lived out of a tragedy. But what we want to do is we want to convert that mode of being into the hero's journey. And I'm not going to go into graphic detail about the hero's journey because we could spend a whole weekend on that. Or a semester for that matter. But what I want to explain is that what the hero's journey is a pattern of transformation. It's a rhythm, so to speak. It's a way of being that leads to personal transformation where you overcome obstacles and become stronger because of it. And it's something that you keep repeating. It's not something you do once and you're, oh, that's good. Okay, I'm a hero now. It's a way of being where you continually engage with your life with the challenges of your life, because all of us have them, and they're never going to stop, by the way. It's like, there's no one that says, oh yeah, I got to a certain point, no more challenges. Ha, great. It doesn't work like that. But especially if you're struggling with chronic issues, you want to live a hero's journey, because if you're not, the tragedy that's not really the story you want to live because it doesn't end well, right? By very definition. I'm going to talk about some of the theory, and then we're going to do some writing exercises. As I mentioned before, you might wonder, why would myths and dreams be helpful? Why can't we just figure this out logically? And the reason why we can't do that is because we have two different modes of attending to the world. And this material is from Ian McGilchrist, one of my new heroes. He's a brain researcher, and he spent 35 years studying the brain function as it relates to brain damage. So he was a psychiatrist, and what he studied is what happens when the brain is damaged to your psychology. And from that work, he discovered that our whole idea about brain regions was completely off base and absolutely wrong in how it was presented. And he rewrote that science. And what he explains is that we have two ways of attending to the world that either make the left brain dominant or the right brain dominant in terms of leading the charge, so to speak. And what he explains is that the left brain's function is to examine, categorize, obtain, control, manipulate things. And that's a very useful thing, because we need to do that to survive. But we also need the right brain, which is able to intuitively sense. It actually is able to understand interconnectedness and relationships between things. And it more senses than anything else. It doesn't examine exactly. It just observes. It's what happens when people meditate for 10,000 hours. There's a lot stronger activation, and many other things, by the way, of the right brain dominance. And so what he explains is that if you want to get in touch with what he calls enchantment and wonder and the divine, you cannot do it with your left brain, because the very act of turning on the left brain makes it so you can't perceive those things at all. And when you're in your right brain, you actually are aware of both the mode of being that you're in and the potential of the left brain, what it does. But the left brain is only aware of itself, of its mode only. So it's very narrow and it's focused. And it's very ignorant of what it doesn't know. It's very arrogant about what it thinks it knows. So what I understand now is that the reason why you can't examine these things logically in an effective way to relieve the conditions we're talking about, which is chronic pain and emotional angst and so on, is because the minute you try to do that, you can't see it. And so that is why we need the arts. With the arts, as I will explain, are an expression of that place in ourselves that's intuitive and that speaks in symbols. And so whether it's literature, painting, drawing, theater, dance, movement, you can fill in the blank. Any of those, meditation, many spiritual practices, all those strengthen and speak to or are much more in touch with the subconscious communications and dynamics of our nervous system. And that's why they're so essential. And so here's the other part we have to remember is the subconscious runs the show. Whether we want to admit it or not, most decisions are made by the subconscious. And as we just went through, is it communicates through body sensations that lead to feelings, that lead to thoughts and images. And that leads to orientations of desire. Like I'm mad, so I want to be aggressive. I'm sad, so I want to collapse. These are all run by the subconscious decisions and how it relates to our world. And then they're all combined, these things I just mentioned, to generate a narrative. And the narrative is our life story organized by our subconscious. And what this narrative actually is mostly is a map of our world. And what it does is it maps out territory. So there's known territory, which is very small, and then there's the unknown, which is vast. And it categorizes places, objects, people, and experience, and like dynamic experiences as either safe, which means you're confident about it, that you know about it, that you consider it some sort of resource potentially too, like something I can eat, something I can sleep in at night, somewhere I can play and have fun, people I can count on. These are examples. If it would also, this map, when it's safe territory, will include challenges, but these are challenges I can handle. So the narrative mapping is mostly for the purpose of saying, this is territory I'm familiar with, and I know that I can handle. That's part of the map. Now, the other part of the map is danger and fear territory. Now, we are afraid of what we don't know. And especially because you don't know about something, you have no idea what it's going to do or not do. So it's kind of, oh my God. And then there are other spots on the map which mark where the dragons are. And what a dragon represents, or you could say monster if you like, is circumstances, people, or dynamics that you tried and that burned you. And you faced it and you came back injured without any benefit. So these challenges could be internal and external, right? So at the same time, but it's often, the challenge could be, an abusive parent, a boss that doesn't value you and is narcissistic, or all kinds of potentials, right? And when we have a traumatic shock, it cannot be integrated into the narrative because it's a spot on the map that has not been turned into a safety spot. And the nervous system doesn't like those spots. It's like, oh, this is not good. This is a dangerous thing I don't know how to handle. And what your symptoms of pain represent are your nervous system crying out for you to pay attention to this unresolved danger and to figure out how to handle it. And the problem is that when we get overwhelmed by these experiences, it actually fragments us and it breaks our conscious mind away from the body. And now we're in pieces. This is what I now understand is myths, legends, dreams, religious and spiritual writings, and even stories that you really love, and even rituals are essentially instruction manuals that help you refine the process of turning your map into territory of safety. That's what all those things are for. They're narratives that help give you an example of what to do or not do. And I'll give you just a few short examples. In the Bible, there's a story of Cain and Abel. Now, I was not raised in the Catholic tradition, and I did not read the Bible very much until later in life. But I've come to understand what that story actually means. It's quite profound. What it means is that humans have a tendency, this is what the story talks about, that when someone shows you up, in other words, they're a better person than you. So there's Abel, right? He's better than Cain in terms of him generating stuff that pleases God. And so what Cain does is he gets jealous and mad. And who knows whether it's actually a fair assessment, right? It's not really the point. The point is his solution to being less than his brother isn't to buck up and be better, it's to kill him. So basically what that story tells us is don't do that. Like, in other words, if you feel less than, be better. Don't go kill your brother. And that would be no different than reading something similar in a legend or a fairy tale, because they all have that aspect where they're teaching you a lesson, usually a moral lesson, but they also teach you modes of being to help solve specific problems. They also often illustrate the hero's journey, which is a series of modes of being that lead to the ultimate transformation of you into a bigger, stronger person. And one of my favorite stories, more modern versions of this, is Tolkien's work, which like The Hobbit. And The Hobbit is a really, really well-written hero's journey. So you have Bilbo, who is this funny little hobbit creature who has been spoiled his whole life and has never really done anything of significance, which he's proud of. And, this adventure calls him out and he goes on this wild adventure. And the purpose of the adventure was, one, for him to make the world better, but it also proved to himself that he was a person of quality, and that he was more than he thought he was, and that he was a good person. And that's what the story generally talks about. And there is a dragon in there, by the way. Here's the interesting part that I think is fascinating. The structure of mythological stories arises from physiological origins. That's what I just showed you on the self-awareness chart. Meaning that the stories are generated within our bodies and then end up as the narratives that we know so well, the fairy tales and so on and so forth. So then knowing that, we can understand that it isn't a trivial thing to use a story as a guide for your life, as long as it's a well-written one that is relevant to your situation. And that, I think that's very individual. So I certainly wouldn't be someone to tell all of you to read the books I like, or to have the other thing is you can actually have heroes that are real people too, because their story, the way in which they deal with life is a narrative that you can adopt and try to put into your life as a way of doing better with what you're trying to do. So these are all different kinds of resources, all these different kinds of stories. And if you're into reading the Bible has tons of those. There's also tons in all kinds of other texts, including Buddhist writings and so on. So we just want to keep you guys to understand that my current understanding is that what those texts are is instruction manuals of how to live better in the face of all the challenges of life.